Some examples might help illustrate the ability of the rational electric paradigm to diagnose and solve problems. To start, let's return to the OVI gas tract example we started with earlier. That's the one where senior management paid $20 million after receiving a recommendation to bid $5 million, and then instructed their subordinates to do what they could to increase oil reserves after the first well came up dry. The three questions. First, who had the decision rights? Senior management had the rights to decide what to bid and to instruct subordinates to explore ways to increase the oil reserves carried in the firm's books. What information did senior management have? They knew that a presumably competent member of their staff had recommended a bid of $5 million and that the first wells drilled were dry. Finally, what incentives did they face? The incentives became apparent soon after the accountants increased the oil reserves carried in the firm's books. Shortly after that, several members of the senior management retired and collected large severance packages. A primary determinant of their severance pay was the amount by which oil reserves carried in the firm's books had increased during their tenure. Since the purchase has resulted in a substantial increase in the firm's reserves carried in the firm's books, the purchase and subsequent increase in reserves increased substantially their severance. These answers imply that the deciders faced incentives that encouraged them to make decisions that were not in the interest of the firm. They wanted to make sure they got the reserves, so they're willing to overpay it, and they had an incentive to boost the reserves carried in the firm's books, even if those numbers were inflated. Two types of solutions come to mind. First, you could move the decision rights and information to someone with good incentives. Second, change the incentives facing the deciders. We'll discuss how to implement these two decisions in class. The second example is Futura Furniture Products. Sales representatives at Futura gather information about likely future orders and convey that information back to the regional sales managers. The sales managers use that information to create sales forecasts, which are usually the basis for manufacturing schedules. Sales forecasts are always very inaccurate, causing extreme havoc in the manufacturing process. Sales representatives are compensated on a salary plus commission, where commission is a percentage of revenue and pricing is controlled centrally. The sales managers are compensated on salary plus commission. Their commission is calculated as a percentage of the difference between regional sales and the forecasted budget. Three questions. Who had the decision rights? The sales managers had the rights to determine the sales forecast. Two, what information did they have? Presumably they had good information from the sales representatives because the sales representatives had close contact with the buyers. Number three, what incentives do they face? The incentives they faced encouraged them to have low sales forecast. Their commission was a percentage of the difference between the actual sales and the forecast. The answers imply that the deciders faced incentives that encouraged them to make decisions that were not in the interest of the owners. They liked to lowball the forecast. Two types of solutions come to mind. First, move the decision rights and information to someone with good incentives. Second, change incentives facing the deciders. We'll discuss how to implement these two solutions in class. These two examples have a moral. Don't base an individual's compensation on a number the individual can change with the stroke of a pen. A corollary moral is to be suspicious of cheap talk. Talk is cheap when the speaker has no incentive to be truthful. The LIBOR scandal is a good example of the consequences of cheap talk. Agents for banks report, quote, how much interest they would pay to borrow money on a short-term basis from other institutions, end quote. These reports determine the rates for the London Interbank Offered Rate, which everybody calls the LIBOR. But this rate their report had no direct bearing on the agent's compensation. The rates in many contracts between borrowers and lenders are tied to the LIBOR rate and rise or fall automatically as the LIBOR rises or falls. The evidence shows that the agents manipulated their reports to the benefit of the banks they represented. The agents inflated their report when the bank was a net lender of LIBOR index funds and deflated their report when their bank was a net borrower or wanted to increase the appearance of solvency.